Peter was very succinct in his event. Thanks to their size and charisma, bumblebees are many people's first loves in the bee world. How can we learn to recognize them in their diversity without getting overwhelmed? And Peter Abrahamsen is an instructor with the Washington Bee Atlas and the Mountaineers Naturalists. He got his start with the bees in his yard, graduating to Xerxes Bumblebee Atlas before identifying nearly 20,000 bumblebees from the Pacific Northwest on iNaturalist. Yeah, we all go at Rainhead every time we see a bumblebee we don't know. The region has always been his home, and he considers getting to know these bees the neighborly thing to do. It's fantastic. Thank you, Peter. You may take over.
I was just really quickly trying to check whether I was lying about that stat. I think that's right though. Um,
It's always needing updating. I change it constantly.
and thanks for everybody for coming today. Um, Bumblebees, hopefully popular topic. Charismatic, this bumblebee putting its best side forward, or backward. Bombus occidentalis, sort of the poster child of bumblebees in Washington. Once everywhere, I think it was the most common bumblebee in the state, and now exists in pockets here and there, including a strip mall parking lot in oh dang, I can never remember the name of the town. I was going to say Des Moines, but it's not that.
Telecom, DuPont.
DuPont, thank you.
I was just there the other day and looking for them, and I did not find them, unfortunately.
Oh, I've also stopped to look. Um, they're here and there. They're charismatic. Actually, your best bet if you want to see them is to go visit Jade and the BC Bee Atlas. They're quite easy to find on Vancouver Island. Um, so I wonder if people can just sort of pipe up in the chat with where you are and what bumblebee you see most commonly. If you don't know the name, you could just describe it quickly. Jade says, I've seen none this year. Huh. Well, species go up and down over time. Yeah, let us know where you're calling in from and what bumblebees you see around you. Quick. Rosalie's in Seattle. She says yellowface. Carla with Melanopagus or Melanopagus out on the Olympic Peninsula. Stevens County, lots, just a diversity of bees. Try Idaho, that's cool. Kirkland, Vaz, and Melanopagus, yep. Moscow, Bifarius, and have seen Occidentalis, that's pretty cool. Lisa sees Occidentalis up in Mission Ridge above Wenatchee and Grizzly-Collis. 10 miles from the border with some nests yet to ID. That's exciting. Aiden is, I believe, in Pullman, Occidentalis, Huntii Centralis. Brown-wilted, yeah, Grizzly-Collis. Awesome. So if these are new names to you, that is totally fine. We're not going to go through everyone. If you tried to, your head would probably fill up. That's what reference materials are for. Pervitus mixtus californicus, thank you, and Tenino from Joe. Don't know beat identification yet. That's why we're here. Rather than go through every species in sequence, which I think would be a little mind-numbing, I want to talk about the process of learning to identify bumblebees. It's a process of learning to see, right? And learning a vocabulary, and applying that vocabulary to what you see. Vocabulary is a social thing, right? So we need to learn that in community. So we'll also be talking about both tools and communities that I think are really helpful in learning. Some of us just want to crack open a book, read it from top to bottom, and then we know it all. I absolutely can't do that. I only know what I know through constant repetition, right? Just like testing and improve my knowledge most days. Awesome. Picardo, awesome. Right. Picardo is my local pea patch, so I think we may have a couple people here tonight from there. That's really sweet. I'm really excited for bees to be a community, right? Not just research topic or academic field. I got my start, like a lot of people, in the pandemic or afterwards, right? A lot of us started spending more time outside. And with climate change, forest fires, everything, there's just sort of a sense of, we can't take these things for granted. Started out more with wildflowers and just sort of skimming the top of everything that's here, just so I knew sort of my community. What if I look at my window, I should be able to name these things. Of course, you look at flowers, you know how this goes. You look at one thing, and once you stop, then you start noticing the little things flying around that beautiful flower. And if you stop long enough, then you see the parasites on the little things flying around the beautiful flower. Um, and posting pictures of flowers, I think of bees, I think probably Tina, Lisa, somebody reached out and said, "Hey, it looks like you like bees. Maybe you want to hang out with us." Um, and one day, my girlfriend sent me a picture of a bumblebee from Bainbridge, and I looked at it. I don't know. I can't find the message anymore, so I don't know what it actually was. But I said, I bet I could learn bumblebees. Um, and and I put a lot of effort into that, so I have enough to tell you what I know and tell you about that process. Um, Most of you have, been coming to the meetings for a while, so you sort of, we're used to talking about antennae and, abdomens and thoraxes and so forth. If you're a little bit newer, this is going to mostly be in Latin, like we use Latin names. A lot of bee people aren't too sure of the common names for the bees. I know that it's friendlier to use the common names, and where I know them, I'll give them. But they have really unhelpful names sometimes, like yellow-faced bumblebee or yellow-fronted bumblebee, um, and that's just not very distinguishing. Most of our bees have yellow faces, especially out here on the west side. Lots of them have yellow on them. So if you just sort of learn it as Latin, then it's just a name like Frank or Joe or whatever that you're learning. Um, this is me. Most of my learning has gone on a naturalist, right? You get this immense resource um, of photos from around the world or across the state. Any taxon that you want to learn. But for bumblebees, it's great. There's people uploading photos from every corner of the state, almost every species that we have. Um, and it makes just a great like set of flashcards, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of flashcards, and a community of people telling you whether you got it right or not, right, and helping you understand what you're seeing or not seeing in that. So here it shows 46,000 edifications. A bunch of those are flowers and things that are not bumblebees. Um, but that's me. And then because I wanted a community to learn beside, um, I joined First Xerces Society's Bumblebee Watch or Bumblebee Atlas. Um, that was my first sort of formal introduction to bumblebees. That really got me going and comfortable with the net. Um, Fantastic group for or project for non-lethal collection of bumblebees as well, because not everybody's into uh, killing bees to learn about them, which is very legitimate. Um, And yes, Franz face or front. Yeah, Franz, I think his face. Flava, meaning yellow or yellowish. Of course, we have Flava Franz and Flavidus, and um, this is actually from an ill-fated Washington Bee Atlas. This is my next sort of community and the one that I've stuck with more. This is on Whidbey Island at a fantastic uh, meadow with all these native flowers at a place called the Pacific Rim Institute, just south of Coopville. It was a cold and wet day, and I think we caught between us fewer than 10 bees, mostly bumblebees, maybe all bumblebees. As I said, bumblebees are all over the state. Globally, there are about 200 species. In the US, there are, I think, 50. And in Washington, nominally, we have about half those species, which is pretty great, right? We're just one little sliver of the country, but we have a really outsized slice of the biodiversity of bees in general, I think, because we have all of these different niches, different geology, right? Different climates and microclimates. So you have different nesting substrates, different floral hosts. We have we have multiple mountain ranges, and that's a wealth to go out and get to know. Bumblebees in general are adapted to cold places, to northerly places, or that is high latitudes, high elevations, um, and because they're fuzzy and they can make their own heat and they're big, so they're good at those things. So that's another reason that we have more of the diversity here in the state. Uh, so nominally, I think we have 25 species. A few of those, one or two of those, maybe nobody's seen in a while. Maybe it's still here, we hope. Um, but what I like to say is that if you're learning bumblebees, you really don't need to just go through the list of everything that exists in Washington or in the Pacific Northwest. In your backyard, there's likely to be, your backyard or your favorite hike or your neighborhood park or something, really just a handful of species to learn. And those may be actually quite visually distinct from one another, right? So, I hope you're not intimidated. Um, Bumblebees are generalists. I don't have a slide for this, which makes them particularly happy in urban areas. There's a variety of flowers to choose from across the year, and so if the climate is good, especially out on the coast, you can find a bumblebee really any month of the year. They can survive, again, they can survive the cold, come out on those few days when it's warmer, and find the one or two things that are blooming. Um, if we're going to learn bumblebees, you need to learn bee parts. This is just me having fun with the slide program. Primarily, you're going to learn the bee parts and you're going to say what color they were, and in some cases, how big they were. This is a general a diagram of your sort of canonical bee, not a bumblebee specifically. And the things we're going to talk about today, of course, here's the head. This is the thorax, also called the mesosoma, but you don't have to worry about that. And the abdomen, metastoma. You can ignore the front legs, ignore them. Middle legs, we're not going to talk about those. We're not going to talk about the wings. Fantastic. We are going to talk a bit about the eyes and the antennae. And we're going to pay a lot of attention to both the front of the thorax, the back of the thorax, and then this space in between the wing bases. And the colors of these things and the shapes of especially this spot here. On the abdomen, these are like segments. Bumblebees are covered in long hair usually, but in other bees you have the same segments and they're a little bit easier to see. So these are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and as people were mentioning earlier, males have a seventh segment. Practically speaking, if you're like out there looking with your eye or with a camera, you're probably only really going to see the first five. They get smaller as you go back. This end can be important for identification, or it often is. Um, but I would really start with these first four, um, and worry about and just like, do you see a blob of color after that? Right, that's something to look for. Um, So I'm assuming that you're not going out netting bees. You're not, putting them on ice to put them in torpor. You're not killing them, anything like that. You're doing this from with your eyes or with even a cell phone photo, as we've seen, is usually good enough to ID these things to species, which is fantastic and really great for learning. Um, so I mentioned eyes. And segments. Oh, the segments, I said they're numbered 1 through 6 or 1 through 7. The abbreviation you often see is like T1, T2, T3, T4. And that just means the tergal or sort of top, as opposed to the belly of the abdomen, which is the sternum. So on the underside you have S, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the top you have T, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And one of the things we're going to practice is just identifying those segments. So you can say to yourself, well, the first 3 segments are yellow, the first 4 segments were yellow. Um, the front of the thorax was one color, the back of the thorax was another color, and the middle was sort of black, but it was not really a spot. It was just sort of, worn down looking. Um, Eyes. Really just 2 things. These ones are huge. These ones are normal size. Um, amazingly, yeah. Well, Lisa, we'll talk about fuzzy photos in a second. Um, so this is a male Bombus nevadensis. Nevadensis being the biggest species in the state and relatively common in the hot, dry parts. Um, its males are have these big eyes for looking for passing females. That's how they detect the females. Some bees have giant antennae. Some male bees have giant antennae for detecting females, and some just stand on top of something tall, like this flower, and look out. Um, so this is one of the species that does that. And if you look here, you've got a first segment, and then if you look carefully, like a little dividing line. Right, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then by 5 you're already black, right? Um, so this is the same species looking quite different. So you're already noticing there's differences in sexes between male and female bees. Um, the female looking, I don't know, this is like a cool, stylish coat, right? It's short, it's even. Male looks a little fuzzier. It's also got extra yellow. If you look at this female, this is actually one segment here. That's T1, T2, T3 is yellow, and then T4, T5, and on are black. Um, and um, and what else can we notice? The female actually has more of a black spot in between the wings, surrounded by yellow, right? So again, we're just learning to see and to name what we see. The other really important thing to notice here is the hind leg. Remember, I said we're ignoring the front leg, we're ignoring the middle leg, but on the hind leg, you've got this triangular thing on the tibia. Right? So this is sort of rectangular. This is a basotarsus. Um, the tibia here is sort of if you're looking at the side of the bee, it's probably the highest thing you're going to see on the leg. There are more leg parts, but chances are this is the thing facing you as you're looking out. See, it's shiny, it's smooth, and it's surrounded by these long hairs, right? So this is called a corbicula or a pollen basket. In Washington, only bumblebees and honeybees have it. So if you see one, you know, you can probably tell the difference. Most of us can tell the difference between a honeybee and a bumblebee. Is it furry? Is it not furry? And then if you see a corbicula, then you know that you're looking at bumblebee. This is, you may think, well, I look at a bumblebee, I know a bumblebee. It's not that easy. I was fooled very embarrassingly recently um, by bees that were not bumblebees. Another thing to look at is this is only if you really get into it. This is like really important for some for identification, but I don't assume that people are going to go. It's really hard to get shot, photos like this. It's hard to get the right angle, hard to get them in focus. But this we sort of informally called a cheek. What is a cheek? Um, it's also called a malar ocular area. Um, So this is a mandible, right? This is how it like chews things up. The mandible attaches to the rest of the face, these two little nodules here. And the size and more importantly, proportions of this space are really important as you get into keys. So these are two kind of extremes. Bombus fervidus, they're here, these two nodules. Um, and you can draw a line between them. That's not very long. And if you draw a line from that line up to the bottom of the compound I, that's much longer, right? So this one extreme, and this is not quite an extreme, but close. Mixtus has this distance uh, shorter than the distance between these, right? So that's like the most technical thing we're going to look at today, but it's sort of obligatory to talk about. Bumblebee like digger bee is really tricky. Haha. Yes. Anthophora bumboides. Anthophora being digger bee, bumboides meaning bumblebee-like. Um, so that pollen basket here, you can see what it's for, right? What it's all about. Here, what bumblebees do is they mix pollen with a little bit of nectar, regurgitate some nectar. Okay, so first what they do is they get all dusty with pollen, and then they take their these like comb-like hairs on their front legs, and they comb themselves. They mix that with some. They sort of spit up some nectar, turn that into sort of a gummy ball, and stick that. You can watch them do this. Stick that on that smooth, shiny surface with these long hairs to help keep it in place. I think these provide some actual like static electricity. In other bees, the hairs are important for holding pollen and static electricity. I think the wetness is enough to do it here. And sometimes these balls will be comically large, right? And this is a great way, like a giveaway for a bumblebee or a honeybee again, because almost everything else carries its pollen dry, just in these long hairs, these long branched hairs somewhere on their body. Um, but in the case of Anthophora, which is the most common thing to confuse for a bumblebee, it's on this hind leg. It's just not in a wet mass. It's all mixed up in this hair. Anthophora bomboides is highly variable, as many bumblebee mimics are. That fly we saw earlier tonight, somebody pointed out was highly variable because it needs to mimic the bumblebees in a particular area. that's a good time to mention that some people really are intimidated by bumblebees because they're so variable. In fact, the same species will look different ways, different parts of its range, and that can be very confusing. Uh, in some cases, even individuals within one colony will look different from one another, and we'll check that out also in a little bit. Just keeping an eye on time. Another difference between bumblebees and Anthophora and many other bees, the males will have either yellow or black hair on their faces, and many other bees, like this Anthophora male, has this yellow clypeus, or otherwise uh, uh, sort of hairless face. So that's also a giveaway. This is something you can see relatively easily from a bee just with your eye, maybe even as it's flying around, that sort of bright yellow spot that's clearly not hair. Another thing to notice about this, again, males yellower often, sort of in general. That's your clue, um, and frizzier. Right? It's important to know whether you're looking at a male or a female because there are different keys, right? Um, some people are intimidated by males, especially. I think if you just think of them as sort of another species to consider, right? Another color form, really, um, then they become not so intimidating, or about as intimidating as females, I guess, to be fair, in that there are some pairs of species that overlap in some parts of the state, and you got to look at very fine features to tell them apart. But most of the time, for most people, it's actually not going to be that bad. Another thing to look out for are cuckoo bumblebees. So some of you may be surprised, shaggy legwormers to tell the Anthophora apart. Yeah, the shaggy legwormer is pretty fantastic. Of course, the male Anthophora aren't going to have that. Uh, Bumblebees are social species, meaning that they form colonies of dozens to hundreds of individuals by their peak, which would be about now, except for two species. Well, two species that you're likely to see. Um, and these are cuckoo bumblebees, right? So we have um, parasitic species exist across the animal kingdom. Um, so most famously is cuckoo, the cuckoo bird, which gets other bees to raise its children. Similarly, in bees, there are cuckoo species that will invade nests, lay their eggs. Those eggs will grow up to eat the provisions that have been made for the host bee. In social, how many bees, Tina asked how many bees are in a bumble nest. Really depends on the species and probably where you are, dozens to hundreds, maybe up to 400 or so. Somebody may have firmer numbers. Um, uh, oh, David says, yeah, okay. So for it depends on the species, what point they get to their sort of maximum size and start producing reproductive children for next year's colony. Cuckoo bumblebees. Sorry, I'm trying to address the chat. Voz gets close to 1,000. Amazing. Anyway, thank you for fielding that, David. Cuckoo bumblebees uh, are like cuckoos of elsewhere in the bee world, but they are social parasites, which means they're a little more gruesome. They will actually, the females, once they've mated, will invade the nest of some normal sort of social species and kill or subdue the queen. and potentially some workers in order to subdue the colony and convince it to raise the bees. So they'll actually live in the same nest, uh, and subdue them both through physical dominance and pheromones. Because of that, cuckoo bumblebees tend to look stockier. They're bigger probably than, at least a little bit bigger than their hosts. Um, and they just sort of look a little plated. Uh, our species, I think they look sort of frizzy, so that's maybe one sign. The thing really to look for, again, going back to anatomy, we talked about segments of the abdomen. We talked about parts of the thorax, but also the colors on the face and the top of the head are really important. So I divide that into the face color, which is black here, and then the top of the head. This is called the vertex, and here it's yellow. And if you see a black face and yellow on the top, I mean, that's telling you something, right? If this were black, this could maybe be Californicus viridis. If the face were yellow, maybe it would be, from this perspective, conceivably Vancouverensis or something. But that combination really points you to this Bombus flavidus. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of Insularis here. Insularis would have yellow, but just sort of a poof by the antennae. Otherwise, they're fairly variable. It's just something you like to know it's there. Um, they may be more identifiable by their behavior. The males will leck on a bush. You might the other week I saw maybe 30, 40 male flavidus on a single bush lecking, which means that they're all sort of competing for the attention of females that might be coming. And we saw that plant covered, I think a mullein covered in Babus wazasensky males earlier. Those might be doing the same thing, sort of hoping to like aggregating because it is advantageous for mate competition. Do the cuckoos target a specific species like Bombus flavidus? Have only go for Bombus californicus? Great question, Tina. Uh, yeah, they have preferences. I associate flavidus with flavifrons, but I think that um, they can invade Polysicensis, occidentalis, and one or two others. Um, but uh, but I often see flavifrons and flavidus populations co-occurring. If there's a strong, if I see flavidus, it's a good sign that there's probably a strong flavifrons population nearby, which in turn probably means we're in sort of a wooded area, potentially. I don't know Insularis's hosts off the top of my head. Tony asks, why does the bee on the right? I assume this slide looked like it has male genitalia. It is marked as female. What am I seeing? Yeah. The thing about and Aiden says it's just the way these parasitic species look. They're very curved. Yeah. So that's a really distinctive thing for Flavidus female is that the tip of the tip of the abdomen is we say recurved, like it's trying to point almost right up back to the head. Um, and the males, unfortunately, you can't see it here. The males will have a little bit, sometimes it's only a few hairs, but they will have a little bit of sort of rusty orange or red on the tip here on T7. Right, Sucklei is the third cuckoo species that has existed in Washington, perhaps still exists in Washington, but nobody's seen it in I think 20 years. Its host is thought to have been occidentalis, which has experienced, that was that first slide with the white butt, that's experienced a big decline. That decline might explain why we no longer see Cyclea as much because Cyclea was dependent on that host. Lisa thinks Enceladus might be associated with Van Dyke's or Giziacalis or Centralis. I don't know. We can look that up in a minute. I do want to get along and probably put some blinders on so I get through this. Bumblebees vary by sex and caste, right? So there are kind of two kinds of females. This is a gyne or a queen. We mostly use those terms interchangeably. You're starting to see queens emerge now. These are the fertile females that will go on to form next year's colonies or found next year's colonies. They're bigger, stockier, but how exactly they look, of course, does vary by species. Sometimes they look a lot like the workers, and sometimes they look quite different. At least here in Seattle, I'm starting to see more of these reproductives just recently. So here's a male looking really frizzy and yellow. Its color pattern is a bit different, but also sort of echoes. There's orange here, there's orange here, there's orange and a little bit here. So these things sort of rhyme, right? The end has sort of bright colors, and then there's this black on T3, and actually even the male has a sort of a dividing line. Is one of the ways to tell a male mixtus. Here's a worker doing her hard work of transporting pollen back to her colony. This queen is a free agent. She doesn't have to do work for anybody else. She's just feeding herself, bulking up, mating, and then finding a place to bed down for the winter. Talked about fuzzy photos earlier. What kind of bee is this? Obviously not a bee. This is a salmonberry. How do I know? Really, just because of the color. There's like nothing else with that color. Okay. Color is really important, also for identifying bumblebees. Here's two species that, unfortunately, this is male, so they're not quite as similar as they might be. This is Morrisoni, Morrison's bumblebee, which is known in Washington only from Ellensburg. I believe Lisa has seen this. Maybe one or two other people have seen it. And evidences. There's I would say, a Morrisoni aficionado, a naturalist who just loves these bees. And he says, so again, I haven't seen it, but he says, you see this rich golden yellow, and there's no mistaking it for anything else. Even though sort of if you looked at you just sort of charted this out, like, well, this is yellow, these are yellow, this is yellow, this is yellow. Like, no. So that's also an important thing to pay attention to. Because otherwise these are very, very similar bees. Oops. Quiz time. No, not actually a quiz, but I would like to just start talking about tools, right? And the two things I want to talk about are what served me the most. One is iNaturalist. As I said, it's a huge resource, just a repository of photos. If you ever like, yeah, but okay, can this species also look like this weird thing that I saw? Like, you can go scrounging around and maybe find something to confirm that suspicion. If you have questions about seasonality, right? Maybe I'm in King County. Maybe I want to look at, when is Bombus Vosnesensky out in King County? There's enough data just in King County to tell you that the males are probably coming out around July, August, right? Some counties don't have enough data, and you should just be looking at a particular state. You can look at range maps, right? So bumping back up to the species, and so I will be clicking around a bit. Hopefully this isn't too distracting. If I wanted to know what species are around me, like I said, there may be only a few that you need to learn to know what's in your yard or your favorite hike. Um, we can just zoom in on, say, the Seattle metropolitan area. Looks like there's plenty of data here. Now, if I go over to species, I immediately find out what species I'm most likely to see. Interestingly, everybody said Voznesensky was the most common bee in the Seattle area. That might actually be true, but people take more pictures of mixtus. Maybe they're bored of Voznesensky. If you hear people refer to Voz, that's just the nickname for Voznesensky because it has a lot of syllables, right? And then everything else, like maybe it's here, existing in small numbers at a background levels. But it looks like if you learn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 species, you'd be good, you know? You could feel pretty comfortable walking around and pointing at a thing, saying a name, and um, and being, yeah, maybe right. Um, the other tool, if you want to find out and like test whether you're right or not, is this book. If you can find it, that's not what I wanted. If you can find it in a PDF, that's great because you can then search. But of course, as a hardcover, it might be easier to acquire. Um, and this is the best set of reference we have right now. There's a book specific to Western North America, but this is a little more authoritative and current at this point. And so if we wanted to know what are all the ways that Bombus mixtus could look, I can just search mixtus. First link is the table of contents. That page is going to be, oops, let me expand this. That page is going to be one of the search results. Now I'm looking at mixtus. And this is what I really wanted to talk about. Okay, I'm going to read all this stuff, learn what these terms mean. But here's all the ways that it can look. Yeah, I'll bump this up. Um, and it looks like, you know, the amount of yellow. So here's the worker color forms. Yellow might just be on T1. It might be on T1 plus, we say medially, sort of in the middle of T2. Um, uh, or it might be all the way down T2. So the way to read this first sort of first 3 segments, that's T1, and then everything else is longer. It gets two little blocks here. So this is T2, front and back, T3, front and back, T4, front has, you know, so maybe it looks like the front of T4 is more likely to have red in the middle there, 5 and 6. And sure enough, if you look at the males, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, this book will also cover the Arctic species, which I do not know at all, and are a little intimidating, right? So if you look in this, you'll see that some species, like vase, are very simple, right? There's really only one, very occasionally 2 ways that it looks. Males have this extra little bit of yellow on T5. That's really handy. Actually, it's one of the easiest ways to tell a male. Everything else looks kind of the same. So that's easy. And then if you go to Rufocinctus, our trickiest bumblebee, like this isn't even all the ways it can look. Not at all. So this is your extra credit bumblebee. Save this one for last. It might not even exist where you are, although it exists in low, at least in low concentrations throughout the state. Okay, we gotta get to it. Yeah. One of the best ways to know that you might be looking at Rufocinctus is it's just too confusing. It just doesn't make any sense. Quiz time. I meant we're going to type in Bombus. That is the genus of bumblebees. You can also type bumblebees. I clicked, sorry, that was too fast. I clicked on view observations and then grid. Now you just got like tons of photos of bumblebees. If you want, you can narrow it down to the bumblebees in your area on the map tab. Switch to here and just sort of test your knowledge. Test your knowledge or just like look at it, like reinforce that association. Like look at this and say to yourself, Vazasenskii, right? Monopigus. If you want to make sure that it's been correctly identified, maybe check this. Go into filters, hit research grade. Now this is much more likely to be accurate. You'll see some familiar faces. Here's Aiden. You'll see, I saw Lisa Hill is on here, Lisa Robinson. I'll post things sometimes. Tina posts plenty. Carla. So again, it feels like a community. And if you ever have questions like, why did you identify it that way? What makes this nevadensis versus morrisoni? You can just go in here, like check out all the photos, look at your book, and when you can't figure it out, just say, hey, I can't figure it out, right? What do you all see that I don't see? So that's fantastic. Yes, bumblebeewatch.org is another great resource worth taking a quick gander at because they have like a similar thing to what's in the book. They only have, I think, one color form per species, if I'm not mistaken. But you can go in here and choose, oopsie, choose your state and look at them. Post your thing. This is run by the Xerces Society, which means the data is going directly towards conservation efforts. There's photography tips, more sort of diagrams with anatomy going over what I just told you. And if you really get into it, you can sort of graduate from uploading things to Bumblebee Watch to the Bumblebee Atlas, which is the same thing but more structured. It has you getting out into the field and taking pictures and uploading them here. David says the Bumblebee Watch is how I learned the bumblebees. Exactly. That was my start as well before I got to iNaturalist. We're sort of concurrent, I guess. It's what convinced me to get out into the field and really start looking. Okay. I've been talking for about 50 minutes. I think what I'm going to do is just reiterate here are these three tools: iNaturalist, Bumblebee Atlas, and the book. Bumblebee Atlas was my gateway drug to all the bees. Aiden says, admittedly, yeah, because bumblebees were my sort of gateway. Um, and I think I want to reserve the time if anybody has like questions, like tricky identification things, or even not tricky identification things that they want to ask. I want to sort of reserve some time for that. I was going to go through pairs of sort of similar species. Okay, let me do that. Let me do that once to show you two pairs of species. Here's a tricky. I'm gonna do it. Bear with me. I'm gonna do it through this because now I can limit it to photos of females. This is Bombus flavifrons, common in forests in temperate parts of the state. If you look at this one, you'll see that there are many black hairs intermixed with the yellow. We call this cloudy, right? That's just like a term of art or something. that is, besides the color and location, that sort of character is a really important thing to know. It'll show up in the literature. And if you go to, it's actually the fastest way to get around. Here's a bumblebee that is otherwise sort of, on the face of it, very similar. It's got, sort of ring, this ring of yellow on the thorax, T1, T2 yellow, and then both flavifrons and centralis, the next two can be either red or black. And that can be confusing, but look how it's just sort of pure this yellow is. It has, I don't think it has any yellow intermixed. You see the black of what's called the integument, the sort of exoskeleton of the bee shining through, but the hairs are all yellow. So that's really key for distinguishing a variety of species. For example, Melanopagus, Melanopagus, has this bright yellow on the back of the thorax, and then very cloudy on the front. And that sort of contrast is what your eye immediately latches onto, because otherwise this could be hunty eye with bright yellow on the front and bright yellow on the back, as you see here. There are other differences, but that's probably a good starting point for this small area of our state where those species overlap. Again, range is your best bet. If you're like, I wonder if this is Melanopagus or Huntii, you can go back to the Huntii page, look at the map, and see, it seems to mostly be like, I'm over here. It's never been seen anywhere near me. Guarantee you these are just mistakes. These aren't actually Huntii. Um, and then you don't need to think about it, right? You certainly can if you want to further your knowledge or your discernment, but you don't need to. So again, I'm Rainhead on here. You can feel free to write me or mention me in an observation to get help. There are a bunch of other people I want to sort of give. Aiden founded MTI in Bellingham. Okay, so it is there, in probably in very small numbers. So you can never completely let your guard down. Remember when we looked at that list of species, there were like 6 that looked like you needed to learn, and then like a bunch more that might be there, but maybe just don't start there. Sorry, this is a community I learned with the help of a bunch of other people. Many of them in this list here. John Asher is a machine, teaches in Singapore. He's American, but has identified just a mind-bogglingly large number of observations on here, and I've learned a lot from him. Carla, rapidly working her way up the ranks, but all these people, Joel Nayland, Xian Zhao, Lori up in BC, Tina here, Domingo, I don't know where Domingo is, and Makari. Many of these people are experts at this point and can provide, are happy to provide advice as you're working. Uh, I think that's about it. We're at an hour. I think people's brains are probably full. So this concludes sort of the formal Know Your Bees slideshow. If you're in an observation, you can just make a comment that's like, "Rain ahead, hey, what do you think of this?" And then I'll see that. I'll get a notification for that little @ sign in my username. Thanks for coming, everybody. I will stop sharing. Thanks to everybody who takes photos and just pays attention and posts them. it's just a fantastic data set now for learning, for research and everything else. So keep up the good work.